On deck, more lawmakers are pushing back on the Biden administration's plan to lift Title 42. Meanwhile, more Americans are filling open jobs as we dive into the U.S. economy this morning. Let's bring in our panelists, Liz Wolfe and Brad Howard, to talk more about this. Good morning to both of you. Thank you for joining me.
Morning, Jeanette. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right, let's talk about Title 42 here. For those who are unfamiliar, it gives authorities essentially the power to deny people entry into the country due to a contagious disease. At this point, it would be coronavirus. So this was implemented at the beginning of the pandemic. This is set to end May 23rd. What's interesting is the Biden administration is getting backlash, not just from the right, but also from the left on this. Liz, I want to start with you. What do you make of it?
Well, I'm, generally in favor of the rights of migrants to seek asylum at our border. They have a legal right to do so. So the fact that we're denying them the ability to do that, really flouts our current existing law. I also tend to be very wary of any public health measures that are made permanent or end up not actually being temporary. And I think Title 42 could be an example of that. So it's probably appropriate to begin to roll this back. And, President Biden needs to do an awful lot to address the situation at the border. But I don't think Title 42 is really the right answer.
Brad, I'll go to you on this. The Democrats, for example, who are against the removal of Title 42 are saying they're sending contradictory messages, right? They're asking for funding from Congress for this ongoing pandemic. And this is essentially saying, but at the border, there is no pandemic. Migrants can come in. What do you make of this? They're worried that this could essentially bite them come midterms.
I think there's two factors involved here. I think this is first an example of that we are emerging out of this pandemic. We're not through it yet, but we are emerging out of this. And so we have to make adjustments to the policies that were set during the height of the pandemic. We are a land of immigrants. We want to welcome anyone here who is seeking freedom and seeking asylum. So I think we're moving in that direction, but there are political realities to adjusting to the new phase of the pandemic. And this is a great example of what might be really good policy for what might be really good policy is sometimes complicated politically. And I used to represent and I used to work for a Blue Dog Democrat and be the spokesperson for the Blue Dog Democrat. And immigration is always a tough issue politically for moderate Democrats. And so I think what the moderate Democrats are urging is for the administration to be deliberate, to make sure they have a plan in place to deal with the influx of migrants, and that we do this in a responsible way that is good for the country and safe for all Americans and upholds the promises and ideals of America.
To that point, Liz, really quickly before we move on to the second segment, as you mentioned there, Brad, immigration inevitably becomes a part of the conversation when it comes to elections and things like that. Do you think it's a valid concern on the Democrats' part that if this isn't handled correctly, it could cost them come November?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you look at President Trump's record on asylum seekers, there was all kinds of political outcry over him setting the asylum cap incredibly low. So when Biden came into office, he basically continued what Trump was doing. Tons of people were incredibly angry about this. Biden ended up lifting the asylum cap to about 62,000 people. But then information has come out that the Biden administration hasn't actually processed those applications, in part because that whole program has been really gutted, and some of that is President Trump's fault. But the fact of the matter is Biden has claimed to be a pro-immigration and pro-asylum president. And I think a lot of people on both sides are very rightly calling him out for the fact that he has not made good on that promise. Yeah. He has not made good on that with Title 42. He hasn't made good on that with the asylum cap. And so there's definitely a way that his administration can really prioritize this. And look, it's now is more important than ever to be able to do that, given the amount of political backlash that's really emanating from the crisis that we have at the border.
We'll have to see how he handles this. As you said, backlash, though, on both sides. Let's talk about the jobs report. U.S. economy brought back more than 430,000 jobs for March. Unemployment rate also fell. Brad, how does the administration take control of this narrative? This has been the trend for the last few months in the middle of this pandemic. How does the Biden administration take hold of this?
Look, we're coming out of a historically tough economic time, the greatest challenging time economically since the Great Recession of 2008. And that was due to the pandemic. And we did what we needed to do to get through it. It hurt our economy, but it was the right thing to do to keep Americans safe and healthy. And now we're seeing incredible job growth numbers. The Biden administration should be proud of the job creation numbers they're doing. The unemployment's the lowest in 40 years. The problem is that we also have inflation at a 40-year high. And that's what Americans are seeing when they go to the pump, when they go to the grocery store. It's the narrative that's dominating all the news. And so the administration has got to get a handle on not only the supply chain issues, but inflation in order to turn the narrative back to all the good things that are happening in our economy. But they've got to recognize the real pain Americans are feeling every time they go to buy something. And then they need to address that pain and fix it. And I think if we can do that by November, the Biden administration have a great story to tell economically.
Liz, I'll give you the last word. We have about 30 seconds here. But as Brad mentioned, it seems not so much getting a job, but wages and inflation seems top of mind for employers or employees, rather, Americans. What do you make of that?
Well, I'm with Larry Summers on this. There was recently a great interview between Ezra Klein and Larry Summers, where basically Ezra Klein was saying, wait a second, for a long time, people on the left thought that we could pump a whole bunch of money into the economy via stimulus checks and really deliver direct cash transfers to Americans, and that the effects would be good. Larry Summers basically said, that's not what's happened. And I think it's really important that people on both the left and the right are very reflective about this, but especially on the left and especially the Biden administration, because we are seeing now the direct consequences of that with inflation being as high as it is. And when you look at polling data, people don't really care about the overall job situation. They're really responding to inflation more than anything.
All right. Liz Wolfe with the last word there. Liz and Brad Howard, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.